Often we lose our voice in the very act of trying to explain it. This is a counterintuitive truth. We frequently assume that if we just find the right words, the perfect sequence of logic, or a more heartfelt tone, the person across from us will finally see our perspective. We treat understanding like a puzzle that can be solved with more pieces. But in many strained dynamics, adding more pieces doesn't finish the picture. It simply clutters the floor. When you decide to stop justifying your boundaries, the tone of the relationship often undergoes a fundamental change. It isn't about becoming cold or intentionally distant. It is about recognizing that your inner world is not a courtroom where you are perpetually on trial. As you withhold the evidence for your feelings, the tension of the conflict may begin to shift, revealing the reality of the situation that you might not have noticed before. For someone accustomed to knowing your every thought, your sudden silence can create a deep sense of confusion. It introduces a weight of uncertainty they might not be prepared to carry. This isn't because they are inherently malicious, but because they have grown used to a level of transparency that allowed them to feel secure. When that access is modified, the balance often shifts, not through force, but through the quiet withdrawal of your emotional effort. Consider the why trap. It's a common scene. You decide to stay home, or you decline a request. It is a simple human choice. But instead of an okay, you may find yourself met with an insistence. Why? It sounds like curiosity, but in high-tension dynamics, it often functions as a demand for justification. It suggests that your decision is incomplete until they give their final approval. Many of us fall into the trap of answering immediately. We offer up our exhaustion, our stress, or our private needs as sacrifices to keep the peace. We believe we are communicating, but in reality, we are often defending. It can feel as though we are no longer stating a fact. We are asking for permission to feel what we already feel. This subtle shift places us on the defensive, turning a personal boundary into a debated policy. Over time, this often becomes a script. One person asks, the other justifies. The first person then pokes a hole in the justification, and the second person works even harder to patch it. It is an exhausting loop that feels like a conversation, but can function like an interrogation. In many cases, clarity may no longer be the primary objective. The focus often shifts toward maintaining a specific rhythm where one person remains the judge and the other the defendant. The more information you provide, the more material the other person has to keep the loop spinning. They might not even realize they are doing it. From their perspective, the questioning works because it keeps you engaged. It keeps you close. It often ensures that you are still working for their comfort, even at the expense of your own. In relationships defined by a high need for control, explanations can become a form of currency. As long as you keep paying with your emotional labor, the other person may have little incentive to change the exchange rate. They might not face the reality of your choice because they are too busy debating the reasons behind it. The transformation often begins when you stop the charade. Instead of a paragraph of excuses, you offer a sentence of fact. I've decided to stay home. When the inevitable why follows, you don't offer a list of grievances or a medical report on your fatigue. You simply state, because I decided to. There is no hostility in this response. There is no desire to wound or to win. It is a grounded intellectual observation of your own autonomy. You are offering less information, not out of spite, but out of a need to preserve your own resources. This often removes the emotional cushioning that usually softens the impact of your independence. Initially, this will likely feel wrong. You might feel a pressure in your chest, a nagging voice asking if you are being difficult or unfair. You might wonder if you should just give them one more reason, just to be sure they understand. This discomfort is often the sound of an old habit breaking. Often, the first person who needs to reconcile with this new boundary isn't them, it's you. You are learning to sit in the silence without rushing to fill it with apologies. When you stop talking, the other person is often forced to deal with the decision itself rather than the why behind it. They are finally looking at the reality of your choice rather than the justifications you used to provide to make it more acceptable. This shift often strips away the layers of noise. It forces an encounter with your autonomy. For some, this can be deeply unsettling because it removes the handles they use to pull you back into the cycle. There is a significant difference between a simple disagreement and the collapse of a predictable pattern. If someone knows exactly how to trigger an explanation from you, they may feel a sense of stability. They know the predictable sequence of the interaction. They ask, you explain, they challenge, you defend. It is a gray, repetitive loop, but it is a familiar one. Predictability, even in conflict, often offers a false sense of safety. But when the blueprint is torn up, when you stop explaining and start simply being, the predictability often fades. This is where the dynamic can begin its most significant transformation. The other person is left in an empty space, forced to reconcile with a version of you that no longer requires their validation to exist. Your silence is often the most honest thing you own. In many fragile dynamics, predictability acts as a constant stabilizing factor. When you behave exactly as expected, explaining, defending, or apologizing, you are inadvertently maintaining a stagnant equilibrium. It is a script that keeps the interaction moving along a familiar, albeit exhausting, track. But when that expected response suddenly vanishes, a void forms. This isn't necessarily a calculated attempt to punish, it is the natural consequence of a system losing its tether. Imagine a moment of tension where the other person asks, "You're really not going to explain yourself?" In the past, this might have been the cue for an extended period of justifications. You might have spent an hour trying to prove your kindness, your exhaustion, or your sanity. Now, you observe the request like a scientist. You see it for what it is, an attempt to pull you back under the influence of their own discomfort. Your response, "I am comfortable with my decision," can be a closed door, not a slammed one. It is often an act of quiet, grounded dignity. There is a common fear that stopping these explanations makes us cold or unfeeling. In truth, it is often the opposite. It is an act of self-possession. A boundary, in this sense, is an act of protection rather than an attack. The intent is rarely to orchestrate a reaction, but rather to opt out of a cycle that yields no growth. Ironically, this is often when the relationship feels most different. By withdrawing the emotional labor they've grown accustomed to, you stop fueling the conflict. You cease watching their face for signs of approval and begin observing your own internal response. You ask yourself, how did it feel to honor my truth? This shift is often the bedrock of autonomy. You are no longer explaining why you deserve respect. You are simply inhabiting a life where respect is a prerequisite, not a debate. When the other person experiences discomfort in your silence, it isn't necessarily because you are being cruel. It is often because they are finally encountering the weight of your choices without the usual cushioning of your justifications. You have stopped managing their emotions for them. You have stopped treating every misunderstanding as an urgent emergency. The ultimate goal of this journey was never simply to win or to make someone else regret their actions. The goal was to reach a point of internal revolution where another person's refusal to understand you no longer feels like a threat to your identity. You become less dependent on external validation and more comfortable with the quiet, sometimes lonely space of your own boundaries. Healing, in its most mature form, is subtle. It looks like answering a question once and letting it stand. It looks like refusing to join the fifth round of an argument that has already been settled. It looks like realizing that your worth is intrinsic, a fact of nature that rarely requires further justification. You are a person, not a list of reasons, and there is a profound quietness in simply letting that be.